Block Party DFS show with Jmtowin from 1 week season. We are going to overview this week 5 DFS slate on DraftKings. We'll go position by position, get JM's favorite plays for tournaments, and then we'll wrap up, as always, with a lineup build on DraftKings using some of JM's favorite building blocks for the slate. I'm Pete Overzet. This is the Block Party with JM. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto match with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 6v6, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, 35 bullets in your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
JM, do you write doctor's notes? Because Brady says he's skipping work for JM today.
Yeah, I got some good penmanship. I'll get in there for you. Pete, you are so good at what you do. I've told you that many times before. But last night I was thinking I was working till, I don't know, 2 a.m. working on the player grid and interpretations for these games. And your intro popped into my mind. And I was thinking, I wonder how much of your ascent in the space is based on just how great that intro is. Like, sets the tone, people get engaged, especially if I just go the other way in that 6v6. I was literally thinking about that last night. Had a good chuckle about it.
I know one of these days I need to do an updated version. It's nice that the evergreen nature of those comments are still relevant. I feel like we need some like Sims comments probably mixed in there for 2024 DFS, but no, I appreciate that. How we looking here from week 3? I was laughing last night, JM, because one of my lineups I rolled out last week was a big Kirk Cousins stack. And then, of course, they scored all of their points via defense. And then last night, I was like, I was just 1 week too early because, boy, would the Kirk Cousins onslaughts would have hit last night.
How often does that happen, right? I try to pay attention to the guys who I'm like Jordan Whittington, Hilo, and I were all over him 2 weeks ago. And then last week he got the role that we thought he was going to have 2 weeks ago. And now everyone's going to be on him this week. Always try to pay attention to those guys that I was early on and be like, maybe I should just go back to the well on those. Week 4 was not a huge week result. I didn't have any big hits, but I really was pretty thrilled with the week in terms of how I built and had a bunch of rosters that were knocking on the door. It was one of those weird weeks where it was like late slate's wrapping up and like had a roster that jumped in the top 50 of the slant. And then that roster trickled down to like 98 and 120. And then a different roster jumped up into the top 50. And then that one trickled down and a different roster jumped up. So lots of ones that were knocking on the door and just a good week of play. So excited to run that back this week and see if the results line up in a bigger way. And yeah, I really like this week. A lot of upside available on this slate and a lot of fun stuff to talk about. Pretty unique compared to what we've had so far this season.
Yeah, I've definitely felt, I do a bunch of the underdog drafts during the week, and with the buys hitting and the injuries, I've definitely felt the constriction on the player pool. Like the amount of viable plays feels like it's shrinking. Doing the drafts, it's like after pick 9 or 10, I'm like, I don't know, man. Like there doesn't seem to be as much at the top end as we had in previous weeks.
Yeah, but there's also, I think, more opportunities than normal for certain game environments to take off. I'm going to dive into this in the Angles podcast, and I dove into it in my DFS interpretations. But we've seen these games, right? The Vikings jumping out to a big lead last week, and then the Packers chasing points, and then we had the same thing on Monday night with the Lions and the Seahawks, and then we had the same thing last night with the Falcons and Bucks. There are opportunities for some game environments to develop like that, where one team jumps out to a lead and they end up with like 30 pass attempts from that guy, but like 50 from the other guy, or for some back and forth game environments where there's pieces on both sides. And those can separate in such a way that you're so far ahead of the field, right? I mean, last night, I think I tallied this up last night. Cousins and Darnell Mooney and Drake London combined for like 109 DraftKings points, something like that, right? Spots like that where you can just get so many points from 3 players and 4% of the field has those 3 guys together, right? And so then you're so far ahead of everybody else. Really, that 4% of the field competing for first place finishes. Not every week's going to have a game like that, but there are some potential opportunities for games like that to develop this week. And then some other guys who just have kind of high ceilings this week. And then there's some things that I'm seeing differently than the field this week, which I always like. I don't mind dying on a hill where I'm alone on that hill if I have a sharp thought process behind it, because I've got 10 years of this, right? So I feel confident that more times than not, when I'm seeing things that way, I'll end up being right. There's going to be the weeks where everybody else hits and I'm just off of what they're seeing. But there's also going to be the weeks where I hit and everybody else is on something different, and that just gives me an edge. So yeah, I actually really like the way this week sets up.
Yeah, I do completely agree with the game environments. There's a lot of intriguing stuff here, and I just pulled up the slate overview here over at 1 week season. Nice little screener here to look at the games and these team totals. Let's maybe hit on a few of these specific games. Obviously, Ravens Bengals is one of interest. Cardinals, if they can keep things going with the Niners, is pretty interesting. Packers Rams could have some juice to it. What else kind of stands out to you from a game standpoint?
Yeah, initially I thought Bills Texans was going to be a really exciting one. And the deeper I got into researching that one and thinking about that one, the more it was like, okay, Josh Allen's hit for 30 plus points twice and this year, right, in this new look offense. Once Khalil Shakir put up 19, once he put up 13. Those are the two best pairing partners with Josh Allen in those 30 plus point games. So as we know, as we've talked about on the show, getting the one guy right, the quarterback right, doesn't actually help you as much as the spots where you can get 2 or 3 guys right with that quarterback play. And then obviously the Buffalo defense, it's so rare that a team puts up a big game against them, and pricing doesn't get knocked down on these Texans guys to account for that matchup. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that's a really interesting game in large field play. I have, I dove into that in DFS interpretation. So if you're on OWS, you can read my thoughts on that in my game write up for that one. But, and then, yeah, the games that you mentioned, I think Ravens Bengals has the highest chance of being one of these 41 to 38, 41 to 35 type of games. Now, there's a very clear scenario in which it kind of ends up just being one of these middling scoring division games. But it's similar to what I kept saying last week with Packers and Vikings, which was both sides have explosive weapons and these divisional games can get crazy, right? I had 11% Sam Darnold last week. My thought process was actually I had Darnold and Love, ended up moving it all to Darnold, but that got me on to, I had Dontavian Wicks last week. I had Jordan Addison last week. And so when you're looking at these game environments and building around them to say, this could shoot out and get crazy, you end up with these plays that just nobody else is on. And then obviously, when Justin Jefferson misses, that's a chunk of my rosters that get hurt by that, but then Jordan Addison's hitting instead. And so I think that this Bengals-Ravens game has potential to be one of those types of games where we've seen some of these games recently. If the Bengals can't stop the Ravens early, but then this Bengals offense has been playing great this year, there's a chance that the Bengals offense plays better than the Ravens defense, and they're able to kind of have this big game. And I think because of the way that the Ravens defense played against the Bills on, was it Monday night, Sunday night, whatever night that was, that's going to chase some people off as well. And people kind of fail to remember that the NFL is a matchup league. And also the NFL is like games or game environment games, right? So the way that the Ravens got up in that game, it just really hurt the Bills in that spot. The Ravens match up well against the Bills. So yeah, I could see this being a close, high scoring game. And then the other two that you mentioned, I'm more interested in, I have a hard time seeing the Rams turning that with their limited weaponry, turning that into like a 35-38 game, right?
Yeah.
But I think that they'll do well here. I think that they'll score 20 plus and force the Packers to kind of score in those high 20s, low 30s. Same thing with the Cardinals and 49ers. The 49ers defense has been giving up some level of points in all games except against the Patriots this year. And so if the Cardinals can just kind of score enough that the 49ers have to score 30 plus, sure, Purdy might have 27 pass attempts, but it could be 275 yards and 4 touchdowns, right? And that's a lot of opportunity for pass catchers there. And so, yeah, I think there's some interesting things to pay attention to in all these games this week.
Yeah, the Bengals Cincy one, and obviously we got Lamar on the cover. That one's interesting too, just from how those teams shake out. I was reading Pat Thorman's pace column earlier, and he had that in a pace down spot, and yet both those teams are averaging a ton of points per play. They're at the top, so it's like that feels like a game that could go either way, right? Like it just really disappoint. It's a little slower. Maybe things don't consolidate, or it could just get nutty. You get the big plays, and we actually get a little more play volume than expected there.
Yeah, there's kind of two sides, right? When play volume is accelerated and both teams are playing fast, or one team is chasing and you get these 50 plus pass attempts from one team, you're basically guaranteed to get 2 or 3 guys who hit from those types of games. But also, even in these kind of lower volume games, we see it so often with the 49ers, where you get only 27 pass attempts, something like that. Well, as long as they're putting up all these touchdowns, then you're still going to have one guy who hits. So you're not going to have those games where it's like this guy's getting 10 catches and this guy's getting 9 catches and they're both getting over 100 yards, but the touchdowns can lead to that upside. And so opportunities there for just, even if these are not high scoring games on some of these, for them to be games that produce something. And then that Ravens Bengals game, yeah, there probably won't be a ton of plays, but if these drives are ending in touchdowns and all of a sudden this becomes this game where touchdowns are piling up and you get these tournament winning scores. So obviously, things can play out differently. That game could end up being middling. And then it's like, you don't get any 30-point scores from quarterback. That's kind of how I see it. Like Purdy and Jordan Love probably won't go over 25, 26 points. Jordan Love's gone over 26 points twice so far. And one of them was last week, right? He's gone over 28 points, 28.8, I think, once. And that was last week. And that was 50 plus pass attempts, chasing points against Minnesota. That probably won't happen here. And so I'm looking at this slate, like Love and Purdy are kind of my favorite step down from Lamar, Burrow quarterbacks, because if there is no 30-point score from these other games, then these guys getting 25, 26 could be what you need to win a tournament. Or if these guys are capped at 25, 26, there could be one of these games that takes off and you get that 30, 32, 35-point score that other people are chasing. So, just a really fun slate to play around with.
Yeah, before we get to quarterbacks, let me ask you about one other game. There's just, I feel like, a ton of uncertainty around it, and that would be Colts Jags. We did just get news that Jonathan Taylor officially ruled out. We haven't gotten word yet on if it's going to be Flacco or Richardson. Obviously, the Jags, a bit of a mess out there, but still, this also feels like a game with two bad defenses that could get nutty for fantasy.
Yeah, it's the one game that I haven't written up yet for my DFS interpretations. It was like 1 a.m. and I was about to dive into it. And I'm like, what am I doing? I'm gonna have to update everything once we have more information. So I'm gonna do my podcast and then attack that one, because if either way, I think this game can pile up points. It's less likely to with Anthony Richardson, but also Anthony Richardson can be the guy who scores 32 DraftKings points at only $6K in salary. On the flip side, if it's Flacco, especially with no Jonathan Taylor, right? Flacco, no Jonathan Taylor. What do you think that Shane Steichen's going to do? He's probably going to just call on Flacco to drop back a ton in this spot. And so that really elevates Michael Pittman, Josh Downs in a way that I'll probably have little to no interest in them if it's Anthony Richardson, because it's a totally different offense, and then a ton of interest in them if it's Flacco. And then on the other side of that, we're waiting on information on Evan Ingram as well. And you're talking about this Jags team that really all they've been able to do is throw downfield. But that's great if the whole story of the NFL is picking up chunk plays, but it's not. You have to pick up first downs as well. And so they need this underneath threat, and Evan Ingram can come in and be that in a matchup that filters targets to tight ends. And so, there's a lot that we're waiting on in that game that could kind of dictate how those final pieces of my builds shape up, right? I'm going to have one of the Colts quarterbacks as part of my pool. It just depends on which one and whether or not I'm bringing pass catchers with that guy. And then, I'll have some pass catcher exposure on the Jags, and it kind of depends on what happens here with Evan Ingram.
As we move over to quarterback, shout out Rocket Sauce becoming a YouTube member here. As always, you get 2 premium shows a week. If you become that hand builder and Opto Bro, you get access to the DFS After Dark series. I do that on Saturday nights. My guest this week is Jordan Chan from SaberSim, really sharp dude who has also been dabbling in the underdog streets a good bit. So excited to talk to him. And then Sunday morning, we'll have the cram at 10:30 a.m. Eastern here that Rocket Sauce was asking about. We go live at 10:30, walk through the slate, final updated thoughts, and all of that good stuff. So you can become a YouTube member and get access to that. Jam, let's hop over here to quarterback. I guess we should start with kind of the cover boy and maybe circle back to that Baltimore-Cincy game here. What are you liking at the top end of the quarterback pool?
Yeah, at the top end, it's primarily Lamar, right? Then we've got these guys in kind of the 6K range of Purdy, Burrow, and Love. Anthony Richardson, if he plays, who are my other main focuses. I like Josh Allen. And the interesting thing with Josh Allen, especially now we've got Khalil Shakir is going to miss this week. I didn't expect that because he got the ankle injury, went to the sidelines, came back in, right? But obviously it flared up throughout the week, and it's a Friday and he's already been ruled out. So the thing with Josh Allen is, we've seen him put up a couple, is it single-digit games? It's, a couple of games of single-digit DraftKings points, and then a couple of games of his typical 30. So his range of outcomes in this Joe Brady offense is broad because they want to lean on the run a little bit more. And then it becomes this question of, like, even if you get Josh Allen, do you get anything else right with him? And if not, then you're taking on a broad range of outcomes to potentially just get one guy right. And that might not really help you win a tournament as much as something else where you get multiple guys right. So Josh Allen's on my list. There's some unique ways I'm going to be playing him in large field. So that'll be in the player grid. And it's in my DFS interpretations for if you're on OWS, but there's some unique ways I'll play him in large field play. I might have one roster of him in smaller field. With Lamar, here's what I'm looking at is Lamar plus Derrick Henry back-to-back weeks, 59 and 63 points, right? And then go back to week 1, Lamar plus Isaiah Likely, 59 points. That doesn't guarantee that we're going to get Lamar plus one piece from his offense going for 59 points, but it's happened 3 or 4 weeks. And the Bengals defense has not been good. And they're getting back Sheldon Rankins this week. And I think still missing BJ Hill, or maybe I have that flipped around. So they get a little bit of improvement on the defensive line, but they still have not been a good defense this year. And so it's one of these things where I always try to think like this. If Lamar plus one of his pass catchers or one of his teammates goes for around 60 points, there are going to be rosters that have that. And then if you don't have it, you're going to be left chasing those rosters. So I think the general tendency of DFS players, they want certainty. So they look at a player at a spot like this and like, well, I don't know who it's going to be. It could be Mark Andrews, and I don't want to play Mark Andrews, right? Like, I don't want to guess how this is going to play out. But the problem is, if it happens, there are going to be rosters that guessed correctly. And if that's 60 points from these two guys, you're pretty far behind the field trying to chase those points. So I definitely want to make sure I'm giving myself opportunities to get the right Lamar Jackson combo on rosters. So if I have, say, 10 to 13 single entry 3-max rosters, I could see 4 or 5 of those being Lamar plus another piece type of rosters. And it might be Lamar plus Henry on 3 of them, and then Lamar plus Mark Andrews, Lamar plus Isaiah Likely. Because yes, if you're wrong, then there goes that roster. But if you're right, people aren't going to want to play Mark Andrews, and you can be right all the way. You can get this 50, 55 points from these two guys that the field just isn't getting. And that includes points at this thin position. So I just think it's a really interesting spot, broad range of outcomes. But within that range of outcomes is you had to have this guy and the right partner. And so I want to account for that in my builds this week.
And it sounds like, when you were talking through various pairings with Lamar, that it would almost exclusively be just a single partner as opposed to any double stacks.
Yeah. I haven't gone back to the numbers, but Lamar doubles hitting are extraordinarily rare. And usually for whatever reason, he ends up latching on. So like a lot of Mark Andrews' big games are not huge yardage games. They're multi-touchdown games. For whatever reason, matchups or just the way that Lamar plays, it often ends up being he's latching on to one particular guy. Or if it's these Derrick Henry games, like Lamar is running more, Derrick Henry's running more, and that's how they're attacking, which I think is what's likeliest against the Bengals this week. Because even when they had BJ Hill and Sheldon Rankins in week 1, they got smashed on the ground by the Patriots. And then week 2, one of them got hurt. I think BJ Hill got hurt in week 2, and they did poorly in that game. They continued to play poorly against the run. So I see the Ravens coming out attacking in that way at first, and then we'll kind of see how things shake out from there. But yeah, primarily Lamar solo. And as I was talking through that too, I think what I like about this week is that this week has a lot of components like this that are less about predicting and more about understanding what could happen for rosters to win a tournament this week. And so because the field, our competition tends to lean so heavily into like wanting to predict what's going to happen. If we can step out of that on a week like this and be like, okay, here's some various, very clear ways that this slate could play out. And here's how you would position yourself to win a tournament. If this happens, those are weeks that tend to bring us a really good ROI over time because we can attack them differently. We're not trying to predict what's going to happen. We're saying, yeah, I'm going to have some dead rosters, but because I'm going to have some dead rosters, I'm also going to have some rosters that hit at a much higher rate than or from like a much higher level than the field is hitting at. And they have to chase these rosters now.
If you were playing the Joe Burrow side of it, and let me know if you're interested in that, would you be including a Ravens piece on most of those Burrow stacks?
Yeah, I'll include a Ravens piece on those Burrow stacks because what we need in this game environment is the Bengals to have to score a lot of points. And if the Bengals have to score a lot of points, it's highly likely that one player on the Ravens is producing. So similar thought process of like, do I know which Ravens player is going to be? No, but somebody's going to have the right combination on their rosters if that ends up hitting. And so I need to make sure that I'm positioning myself to be one of those someones who has that right combination on a roster. And with Burrow, it can be Burrow singles, Burrow doubles. I don't like playing Chase and Higgins together because it's so rare that they hit together. But there have been 2 games, I think 2 games in the last 2 years where Jamar Chase hit for 30 plus points and Tyler Boyd hit for 20 to 30. Obviously, Yoshibas is in that Tyler Boyd role now. So there's ways to play, Jamar Chase plus Yoshibas or Jamar Chase plus Eric All Jr., Jamar Chase plus Mike Gesicki, Higgins plus one of those guys. So that's how I'll be attacking that spot.
Let's talk about Jaden Daniels. Been one of the most fun storylines of this season. Has shown both a high floor and hit, close to a ceiling here. It is interesting to see he hasn't cleared 30 DraftKings points yet. A lot of that due to not a ton of pass volume. I'm not sure how the field is going to feel about him this week. It doesn't seem like everyone's just piling in to play him. But how are you kind of viewing Jaden Daniels in this spot?
I'm not going to be on Jaden Daniels this week, but I don't think he's a bad play because he's one of these guys who can, especially against an aggressive Browns defense, right? He can hit for big plays. Things can break his way. I shouldn't say I'm not going to be on Jaden Daniels because it's Friday, right? And I play MME in addition to single entry 3-max. And so he's not going to be in my core set of rosters. I might have some of him in large field play. I do think it's interesting, right? We're seeing a lot of attention on Deshaun Watson, it looks like, early ownership projections because of this matchup against Washington. So it seems like people will be more on that side than on the Washington side. So one way to play that would be to say, like, okay, Deshaun Watson, I think he's played 20 games with the Browns. Maybe it's 15 games. Like, he hasn't topped 21.9 DraftKings points, and he's cracked 20 points only 3 times, I think was the number, right? So it's like, he is a mediocre quarterback at this point. He's not the quarterback he used to be. So how does Deshaun Watson get there? Maybe through Jaden Daniels having a much bigger game than him, for 1,500 more. So I think that's an interesting way to approach this spot, just kind of leverage what the field is doing and play it a different way. So from a strategy standpoint, I like Jaden Daniels in large field play, but from like an individual play standpoint, just given the matchup, it's going to be harder for him to hit that, 25 to 30 points that we'd really want from him.
Let me toss 3 names at you, some pocket passers who have decent matchups, grading out as decent values. You did mention one of them before, but let's go with, you got Brock Purdy at 6,200, Geno Smith at 5,900 versus the Giants, and then Trevor Lawrence versus the Colts at 5,700. Anything jump out to you there?
Yeah, I mean, Purdy, I think that Purdy and Jordan Love are kind of the standard in terms of they're both, one or both of them is likely to score. One or both of them is almost certainly going to score like 19 plus DraftKings points. There's a pretty good chance that one or both of them scores 24 plus. So I kind of see them as the marks that you have to jump over. If they're getting 24 plus and they're both, let's say, 8% owned, something like that, that's a pretty good sized chunk of raw. That's almost like the cashing entries that are getting like 22 to 24, 25, 26 points at quarterback. And so you then have to think about, like, if you're paying down and you're getting 20 points or 18 points, you're now behind those rosters just for saving a little bit of salary. If you're paying up and you're getting similar score, you're overpaying for the same score. So to me, I'm looking who can score, because I don't think these guys have clear paths to 30 points. They would really need game environment to cooperate to do that. And so I'm looking at, like, okay, who can score 30 points? Trevor Lawrence is kind of, again, I haven't written up that game yet. And that's the one spot that I'm like waiting on information. I mean, he's been legitimately not good, right?
Yeah.
I mean, what if they lost?
His box score is
they
awful.
lost like 10 in a row, something like, I mean, this has been a bad team. So, but no, I think we can wait around for, remember the Brady's last year where it was like all year, it was like Brady plus Evans plus Godwin has to hit at some point. And then by like week 9, it's like, okay, it's not going to happen. Like, this isn't the same anymore for whatever reason. We can do that with Deshaun Watson, with Trevor Lawrence, with guys like this. At the same time, he can turn it around. Yeah, I mean, I don't mind Trevor Lawrence. I might have some of him in large field play. Probably likely to have him if Flacco's playing, because then, there's that chance for like this to become that type of game environment. Geno, I mean, he's been awesome this year. He's looked so good. This offense has looked so good. I don't see it against like a pretty decent Giants defense, one of the top red zone defenses. So Shane Bowen, defensive coordinator of the Giants, it's kind of his thing, is like the advanced metrics are going to look middling because they're going to give up yards and teams are going to drive the field on them. But last year, the Titans finished, I think, number 1 in red zone defense. 3 years ago, they finished 4th in red zone defense. Right now, the Giants are 6th in red zone defense. That's kind of the Shane Bowen thing. It's very much a Mike Vrabel thing, right? And that's who Shane Bowen came up under, is like, sure, they can drive the field if they don't make mistakes, but we're going to make it really hard on them to score touchdowns. And then, Geno's got 4 passing touchdowns. The Seahawks have 7 rushing touchdowns and then another, receiving touchdown from back. And analytically, it's easier to score on the ground than through the air in the red zone. So, I mean, especially in a game where I don't see the Giants keeping pace without Malik Neighbors, I have a hard time seeing Geno Smith putting up 30 DraftKings points. I mean, he have a really hard time doing that. And could he put up 22, 23, 24? Yeah, but you're taking on more risk than you're taking on with Love and Purdy to get kind of the same score. So Geno's just not in my pool at all this week.
Yeah, it's tough because also with Neighbors ruled out, Singletary's banged up. It's like, are the Seahawks going to get pushed? And if they're not getting pushed, they'll be happy to run the ball. But it does, like, at some point this year, it's going to come together for Geno Smith like it did for Baker Mayfield last week, where it's just like he's playing so well. He's going to have a 3-touchdown game one of these weeks, but it doesn't seem like this is the spot for it necessarily. Any other quarterbacks, maybe cheaper guys, or anyone we haven't mentioned that you would consider on your short list, or did we hit them all?
Yeah, I mean, we hit them all in terms of what I really like this week.
Yep. Okay. Let's move over then to the running back position. Like I said at the top of the show, we did get news that there is going to be no Jonathan Taylor. There's a quote from Steichen saying it'll be running back by committee this week. We can maybe talk about that a little bit as it pertains to Trey Sermon. But at the top, death taxes and Jordan Mason looking like a great play, 7,400. Coming off another big game. You talked about Kyren a little bit at the top, other values. Chuba continues to play well. Kenneth Walker going to be popular. What else are you seeing here at the running back position?
I think the running back position has to be talked about through the lens of what's available from affordable running backs, which is kind of like this, let's say, Chuba Hubbard and below range, where I think a lot of these plays are more fragile than they appear or than ownership is going to imply. So like DeAndre Swift, it looks like people want to play him this week after he had his big game last week. And, he had 7 catches last week on only 23 Caleb Williams pass attempts. And that seems unlikely to be replicated. And then, the Bears don't have good run blocking. They've been a horrible running team this year. So I like DeAndre Swift, but I think that people are going to overrate his floor ceiling combo, right? What I like about DeAndre Swift is he can score 30 points. That's what I've always liked about him. And last year I played him probably more than anybody else, and he got like one of those games all season, but you just kind of can keep playing him and waiting for those games to come. So I like DeAndre Swift. I think he's going to be overrated by the field, but I like him. Jerome Ford, a guy who he's played 20 games since Chubb went down. He has 15 games of double-digit DraftKings points, right? And people love that. And they look through the game logs. It's like, oh, this guy's always kind of there. But he's top 20 points. I think it's 2 times or maybe 3 times, right? So it's like his ceiling isn't high. He's not going to win you a tournament. And then Chuba Hubbard, 25 and 30 points last 2 weeks. Those are his 30 points is his best game ever. And 25 points was, I believe, his 3rd best game ever. And you remember he's had these years where he had a monster role. Right now he's playing 60% of the snaps. So You're really betting on him continuing to play really well, get the 100-yard bonus, score a touchdown against a really good Bears defense. They're not good against the run, but in terms of scoring touchdowns, you still need him to be in that position. So I'm not against any of these plays, but I'm just highlighting that I think they're all a little bit more fragile than the field is going to give them credit for. So I'm going to have all these guys, but I think that there's a separation factor of potential for all these guys. There's other cheap guys that we might or might not touch on, but for all these cheap guys to kind of be in like this 12 to 15 to 18 point range, and then maybe 2 of Derrick Henry, Kyren Williams, Jordan Mason go for 28 to 30. And if that happens, like that's just really nice separation. So I'm going to have a lot of rosters this week that play around with paying up for 2 of these guys because there's not a lot of wide receivers over 6.8K that I'm really drawn toward. I mean, there's Jamar Chase in those game environment builds, but if you're not in that game environment build, like there's really not that much that I want to be chasing up there. And so I think Derrick Henry, Kyren Williams, Jordan Mason, all kind of Henry and Mason in the same bucket, right? They both probably get 20 to 25 touches as long as game environment cooperates. They're both going to have the goal line opportunities. Henry has more risk of the game environment not cooperating, obviously, because maybe the Bengals take a lead and this kind of goes a different way than people would expect. Whereas Jordan Mason's probably going to be able to keep getting his touches. And then Kyren Williams kind of focal point of the offense. So I really like all 3 of these guys. Worst case, they probably end up topping 20 points. And then, best case, they all have a shot at 30 plus. And then, like I said, I like some of these cheaper guys. I just think they're more fragile than the field is giving them credit for.
Do you have any, I know you said you hadn't fully digged into that game, but any thoughts on Trey Sermon? In some weeks, I would imagine he would be pretty popular as a fill-in. I wonder if some of these quotes about, running back by committee keep things a little bit in check. He had one game last year where he filled in for it was Zach Moss who got injured that week 15 game, and he had 88 yards rushing on a decent amount of carries. That's really kind of the one time we've seen him have the backfield to himself. Thoughts on Trey Sermon?
remember how excited people were about Trey Sermon early in his career? Like he went
On
to the
the Niners.
49ers where any running back can succeed. And it was like, oh, we can't use this guy.
Yeah.
I'll always be happy betting on Shane Steichen. There's just a handful of coaches that no matter Sean McVay is another one. Hopefully we get to talk about that Rams offense a little bit. These coaches who they're able to identify their personnel, give them a week or two, and they're able to figure out how to call a game plan with the personnel that they have. And Shane Steichen is one of the best in the league at that. So I wouldn't put it past him to figure out a way for Trey Sermon to have a big game. But we're talking about Trey Sermon's just a guy. Who knows if he's going to get all the touches? And he's kind of in this price range where we didn't even touch on Austin Eckler, right? If Brian Robinson's out, Austin Eckler is really interesting. And we know Jerome Ford's going to get double-digit points most of the times in this spot. DeAndre Swift has that ceiling. Chuba Hubbard, has the role. Even Ramondre Stevenson potentially has the role. Some questions there this week. But yeah, I think Trey Sermon's kind of behind all those guys for me. But it wouldn't surprise me if he puts up 20-plus points because it's kind of the Shane Steichen effect that he can figure this out.
Yeah, you mentioned, Jordan Mason, Kyren, Derrick Henry at the top. You didn't include Kenneth Walker. I have a feeling the field is going to kind of include him with that top three as far as how much he's utilized. What are your thoughts on Kenneth Walker here?
Yeah, so he's on my player grid. He's in the bonus section. So for me, it's blue chips, light blue chips, and then bonus. And then bonus has like a tier 1 and tier 2. So if you're an OWS sub, you know that. But yeah, so it's rare that I have blue chips. Blue chips is like, this guy's almost certainly not going to fail. But I have Kyren and Jordan Mason and Derrick Henry in that light blue section, and then Kenneth Walker in the bonus section. So he's not quite up at the top for me. Obviously, another hallmark of Shane Bowen's defenses is they're typically going to be stout against the run. The Giants haven't been stout against the run to start the season, but they have the personnel to be stout against the run. And then obviously Charbonnet is going to siphon off some pass catching work, when both these guys are playing. So I like Kenneth Walker because the running back is so central to this Ryan Grubb offense and so central to what they're doing in the red zone. And on top of that, Walker's got this big play upside. But yeah, I don't think that he's as much of a floor ceiling combo play as these other guys. It's easy to look at the game logs and you see 21 and 33 and it just feels really good. But yeah, in terms of like his role in this offense, how it matches up against this defense, this game environment, I'm not quite as high on him as I am on the other three, but he's still in my pool this week.
Two names that kind of fall in that no man's land as far as salary, as far as not necessarily being an elite workload guy, not saving enough money for a salary from a salary perspective would be Josh Jacobs and James Cook. Any thoughts on those guys?
Yeah, I think I'll mostly play Cook with it was funny because so far this year when Cook hit, Josh Allen put up 8 points and vice versa. When Josh Allen's hit, Cook hasn't done anything. But I think I kind of want to play some unique paths around this game and play them together. So again, I dive deeper into that in the player grid of like what I see about how this game could play out to where that could work. But no, I'm not like isolating Cook. It's a really good run defense for the Texans. And so, yeah, not isolating Cook. Who's the other guy? Oh, Josh Jacobs.
Jacobs, yeah.
We've had this weird Matt LaFleur running back thing again, right? Where like,
yeah,
Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson have almost seen the same number of touches the last 2 weeks. And so it's always hard to trust this Matt LaFleur backfield. I think what I'm looking at for Jacobs is like carve out some large field exposure to him, but I don't feel comfortable or confident in him. So the way that works for me is he could end up on a single entry 3-max roster because he has enough ceiling to justify that. And it would be like if I've got 5 or 6 high confidence pieces on a roster and Josh Jacobs, I might be like, I'll take this swing here on Josh Jacobs, but pretty low confidence for me in terms of what's his role and what's his floor, but certainly has the ceiling. And who knows, right? He could end up with like a 26 touch game because we would see that with Aaron Jones every once in a while. With Aaron Jones, it was like, why would you not play Aaron Jones over who is it? The Boston College
AJ Dillon.
Yeah, AJ Dillon. Like obviously you would play Aaron Jones over AJ Dillon, and then Matt LaFleur wouldn't. And then Emmanuel Wilson has actually looked good. So then the question is like, how much is he just going to keep doing this thing where he rotates running backs? So yeah, I'm just a little bit, I guess, thrown off by that and not totally confident in what we'll get there.
Yeah, for those of you watching here on YouTube, I did pull up the kind of snap data for Josh Jacobs and Emmanuel Wilson. And it is kind of shocking how much Emmanuel Wilson is playing, because you would think, okay, maybe it's just some passing down stuff, 36% of the routes, 21% of the routes in week 3 and 4, but it's the rush attempts, 35% in 3, 44% in week 4. So that's a meaningful chunk of the pie to take away from Josh Jacobs there.
Yeah. And I guess it's also, you can bet on game environment, because you look at this. Josh Jacobs, 51% of the snaps, 61% of the snaps. That 61% is basically what Chuba Hubbard's been playing. And so if you have a game where the Packers are dominating and they're creating a lot of rush attempts, you can still get the 20 carries or 18 carries and 3 or 4 catches for Josh Jacobs. And then Emmanuel Wilson gets a kind of a large share as well. People haven't noticed it with the Panthers as much because Miles Sanders has done nothing with his touches, but he's playing 40% of the snaps. He's getting touches. So we could see something similar, right? We've got 25 and 30 points from Chuba the last 2 weeks in a similar snap share role. So it's certainly within the cards for Jacobs to have a really good game, but there's a lot of questions. He's not the 90% running back that he was, in week 2 or with the Raiders in the past.
I do just want to mention, since I have this pulled up, you guys can get access to the full suite of utilization data over at Fantasy Life via Fantasy Life Plus. Promo code Pete will get you 20% off. There's all kinds of great data there, all the DVP stuff as well. They got the Pick'em Builder, so all kinds of stuff. You can get that at fantasylife.com. I got the link down in the show notes. JM, any other running back plays? I don't know if there's some cheapies. You mentioned Austin Eckler. What about a guy like Javonte Williams against the Raiders at 5,200? He's had some herky-jerky usage, but Beatty out, and Raiders pretty soft against the run.
Yeah, I mean, the Broncos are just so bad at scoring touchdowns is my concern, right? Yeah. Like, if I really need the savings, I can go there. And can Javonte Williams trip into a 20-point game? Yes. But obviously what's likeliest is that he's going to get 10, 11, 12 points, 8 points, maybe 13 points, right? Something in that range. And then how valuable are the savings, right? You're not saving that much off of these 5,700, 6K running backs that people actually like. And how much do you need the savings on this week? What are you paying up for? So yeah, I do question the ceiling on that. And I think that, I know that the likeliest scenario is that Javonte Williams rosters will have an uphill battle to climb from that spot, because, then you end up getting 10 to 12 points. And then you have to be really sharp with how you're using that extra salary. That extra salary has to really go a long way and hit on just the right guy to make up for the lost points there. But there are scenarios in which he goes for 20 points. We can't discount. I mean, crazy things happen in the NFL, but I don't see him as being particularly plus EV. And the fact that, he's lining up as being somewhat popular, to me, I kind of mark that down as one of my edges on the week, where if he goes for 20, then great for everybody who rostered him. That's kind of the less likely scenario. And I can still win without him. If he goes for 25 or 30, then that's just like, this just wasn't my week, Yeah. And if he goes for his likely scenario, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, then, you just get an edge on all those rosters.
So it sounds like in general for this week, as much as possible, you would like to kind of be paying up at running back, getting access to those top 3 guys as much as you can.
Yeah. And I think that there's ways to do that, right? Because if you've got some wide receivers in kind of the 6K range that you like, some in the 5K range that you like, Jordan Whittington, Trey Tucker, there's some cheaper guys that you can get on. And if you're not having to spend a ton at tight end, we'll talk about that too. But I just think that there's opportunities to be a little bit more middling in your salary structure, and you can get up to 2 of these more expensive running backs, or at least one of these more expensive running backs. In fact, I'll probably add a rule to the Bink machine that I want at least one of those, 3 more expensive running backs on like 90% of my rosters. And then obviously I'll have a lot of rosters with 2 of those guys.
We got Noel Fan in here. JM is the GOAT. Thank you for the super chat, Noel Fan, one of the great DFS players out there. Thank you, Noel Fan. I know a lot of you guys last week checked out 1 week season. Hope you took advantage of that free weekly pass that we told you about. No free weekly pass this week. However, we did up the discount with promo code Pete. So this week, promo code Pete30. You add the 30 to the Pete there. We'll get you 30% off 1 week season. That's all the various Inner Circle subs for the rest of the year. JM was mentioning his player grid with the blue chips, the light chips, and all the other chips in between there. You can get those. Will populate over the weekend. And also highly recommend the Edge, where there are the full game breakdowns as well as JM's interpretations specifically for DFS. So an awesome value right now. Take advantage of Pete30 and get access to all of the 1 week season content for the rest of the year. JM, anything else I should be highlighting at OWS this week before we head over to wide receivers?
Just a reminder that the NFL Edge game breakdowns are free as well. So even if you just have a free account, you can get those. 1 week season podcast feed has those in audio format. So they don't have the DFS interpretations, but they have the actual game breakdowns of, how these teams interact, how they'll each try to win. So you can find that on the 1 week season podcast feed, along with other free podcasts. You can find that on the site, and then obviously find all the other goodies with a subscription.
Awesome. Let's head over to wide receivers here. We'll do wide receivers, tight ends, and then build a lineup on DraftKings. You did mention we have some better value plays this week. I feel like some of those guys who have really seen an uptick in usage. You mentioned Trey Tucker without Devontae Adams, Jordan Whittington with that depleted Rams room, and then some of the mid-tier guys who project as well good values. So is that where we should start for wide receiver, kind of looking at the value plays that open up other things? Because like you kind of mentioned, we don't have a ton at the super high end that's really attractive.
Yeah. And I think, so I'll start with Trey Tucker, who is, it's funny, this Broncos defense has been amazing this year. And I think that the carryover from that 70-20 game against the Dolphins last year, well, I think we've talked about this, but all last season, people still talked about this historically bad Broncos defense. And yet, if you just isolated, like say week 6 or 7 on, they were one of the better defenses in the NFL. Vance Joseph finally got these guys playing within his system. And that was a unique game against the Dolphins, and people just kind of held on to that all year. And they've taken another step forward this year. They've been a top 5 defense, and people are getting onto it, right? Like, they're 2,900 on DraftKings. They're projected to be one of the most popular defenses. But I've also noticed people keep making excuses for the Broncos defense, right? Like the Buccaneers had a letdown game, and that was why they did so poorly against the Broncos. And then, the Packers, there was rain. It's like, there was drizzle. Like, that doesn't really affect Aaron Rodgers. Like, Aaron Rodgers is one of the best weather quarterbacks in NFL history. And so, it's just a good defense, right? So I think that I think Trey Tucker's range is going to be overrated by the field. At the same time, like, they're probably not going to have Devontae Adams moving forward. So it makes sense. And this is a team that can't run the ball, and they have not tried to run the ball for the most part. It makes sense for them to say, look, like, this is our offense moving forward. Let's figure out what this looks like and how this is going to work. And so I think we're going to keep seeing these 6 to 9 targets for Trey Tucker. In fact, 9 targets in week 3. Devontae Adams played that game. 9 targets in week 3 on 40 pass attempts, so just under 25%. And then 6 targets last week on 24 pass attempts, so 25%. I mean, this guy's getting a large target share. So the way I'm looking at him is, it's a brutal matchup. His chances of scoring a touchdown are low, but also, is this the hill I want to die on? And so just from a strategy standpoint, I'm going to make sure I have some Tucker exposure and not try to say, oh, it's a tough matchup, I'm not playing this guy. I'm going to have plenty of rosters without Trey Tucker, but also I'll be at least even weight the field on Trey Tucker, because his price is too low for his role. Even though it's a brutal matchup, if he puts up 15, 16 points, it's going to be tough to chase in other spots. The guy who's likeliest to perform at or above that level is Whittington. And what I'm seeing with the Rams, so kind of mentioned earlier, I wanted to touch on the Rams, is Sean McVay is so good at saying, what do I have to work with? Let me figure out how to do it. And what we saw the first few weeks of the season was he kept, through all these injuries, he kept mixing and matching pieces. And usually you go through like PFF game logs, snap rates, and you'll click on like 7 games, and it's like, this guy played 70% of snaps, this guy's 60%, this guy's 65%. Then you get to Rams games and it's like 90%, 95%. Like, that's what Sean McVay likes to do. He likes to keep a static group on the field. So the last few weeks he hasn't done that, or the weeks 2, 3, he wasn't doing that. And then last week he had that static group, and it was Jordan Whittington, Tutu Atwell, Demarcus Robinson. The like primary options in the pass attack were Whittington and Tutu. The offense flowed through Kyren. And so it was I kind of see that as Sean McVay was mixing and matching pieces, figuring out what's going to work best. And now he's like, okay, this is our offense, and now we're going to design the offense, call the offense to run through these guys. Sean McVay is so good at that I would expect Whittington to have an opportunity to have a really good game here. Furthermore, the Packers, one of the highest zone coverage rates teams in the NFL, which I think is important in this spot because we saw it last year with Puka. Like his numbers were dramatically different zone versus man, because man coverage, you just have to be an excellent NFL wide receiver. Zone coverage, you have to be excellent at understanding the defense and identifying what to do. And those are the types of players that Sean McVay and Les Snead like to draft, develop. So I feel like they can coach Jordan Whittington up to like, here's what we want you to do against these looks to get open in zone coverage. So really like, paying attention to both these guys sub 5K. There's some cheap guys I'll touch on in the player grid that are kind of more dart throws with some ceiling, but those are the guys who really stand out to me on the sort of more affordable end.
What about on the Packers? Obviously, Jaden Reed has been awesome whenever Jordan Love has played. We've seen Dontavian Wicks have a breakout game last week. Romeo Doubs running a ton of routes. He's been banged up, I believe, didn't practice yesterday, so something to monitor there. But thoughts on kind of the Packers side of this game?
Yeah, Wicks, another guy that the field is going to overrate, but I still like him. And those of you who have watched or listened to me or read me for, a decade, I'm naturally contrarian. And that's one of my weaknesses sometimes is like, I can like a player early in the week. And then I see that guy's going to be popular. And my mind's tendency is to shift over to like, okay, what are the holes? What are the flaws? So Dontavian Wicks is one of these guys who I like. I think the field is going to overrate him, but that's not going to change. Like I'll probably end up underweight the field because of how much they're going to chase him, but that doesn't change the fact that I like the play and I'll have what's my comfortable range. The thing I'm looking at with him is, Love threw the ball 54 times last week. He's likely to throw the ball 34 times this week. So, the chance of Wicks seeing another 13 targets aren't that great. But, like I said, I had him last week when Christian Watson was active. This is a guy I really like. He has tons of upside. Love's last 13 games, it's been Jaden Reed 7 times is who you would have wanted. And then it's been like Romeo Doubs once. It's been Bo Melton once, when there was a bunch of injuries. It's been Dontavian Wicks once. So it's kind of maybe it's been Christian Watson once. And so it's likely to be Jaden Reed. But if it's not Jaden Reed in this spot, it's probably going to be one of these other guys. So to me, it's like you focus on Reed, but then you also mix and match these other guys. But I'll probably have less exposure to Wicks in the field, but more exposure to Doubs in the field, just because like it could be any of these guys. Same thing with Tucker Kraft. Like I'll be underweight the field on Kraft, but I'll have exposure to him because I just like this offense. I like this spot. I want to make sure I get the touchdowns that come from this spot.
I'd say some of the top guys this week, as far as just kind of like pure projection, would be Nico Collins, Deebo Samuel, Jamar Chase, DK Metcalf. Thoughts on the higher end at wide receiver?
Yeah, I mean, Chase, for me, it's a game environment thing. I'll have some of him away from game environments, but mostly betting on that game and betting on Chase being a driver of that game environment. I don't tend to play wide receivers against Buffalo because no matter where, it was like 7 years ago that for a little while DraftKings played around with dynamic pricing. And so prices would raise or lower based on the matchup. And so in that instance, we might see Nico at like 7,100, and then it makes it a tougher decision. But once dynamic pricing went away, I don't typically target wide receivers against Buffalo because they tend to underperform their typical production, and their salary is based off their typical production. So I will bet on, I'm going to have some Stroud overstacks in this game, and that's where I'll play Nico. But this is going to be the first week of the season where, I had 50% Nico last week, right? Like this is nothing against Nico as a player. It's just one of these spots where I don't see it being that likely to emerge as like a guy I had to have. Same thing with DK Metcalf, just talking about the game environment and the nature of how he's used. And it's important to think about this, right? Like if the 49ers don't have to throw the ball a ton, it's typically going to be Kittle or Deebo who hits because those guys are more in yak roles or touchdown dependent roles. Whereas like the pure wide receivers who aren't yak guys like Brandon Ayuk, he typically needs more volume to hit. So I see DK Metcalf similarly. Obviously he can hit for big plays, but they're not just like designing ways to get him the ball in space so he can have big yards after the catch, be a running back in open space like a Deebo or a Kittle. So I kind of tend to gravitate in these games where I expect one team to dominate. I tend to gravitate toward the guys who can be more yak guys than just like pure wide receiver guys. So really, above Deebo, I'm not going out of my way to get these guys this week outside of Chase, where, I'll have a lot of him in those in game environment bets there, and some spillover from that.
We talked a little bit about Chuba, the other awesome fantasy asset, in that Andy Dalton-led Panthers offense has been Deontay Johnson. I know he was on the injury report earlier this week, but 6,100, he has just an awesome role right now. I think he'll be fairly popular. Thoughts on Deontay?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. There's a Chicago defense, another one I don't play wide receivers against because, again, your price tag set at your typical production, and that typical production is usually going to be a lot lower against Chicago. So if Deontay scores 20 to 24, like that's going to be a really great game for him against this defense. If he scores 30, then it's one of those spots where you throw up your hand and say, okay, cool. Like now I have to chase those points, but that's a pretty low likelihood scenario. And there's a chance that there's edge in not playing him because, he could put up 12, 15 at this price tag, and you're using that spot for somebody who can go for 25 to 30. So the role's awesome. He's, in terms of like talent with a good quarterback, he really is like a 6,800 to 7K wide receiver, and he's in that role, and this quarterback is working well with him. So I think he's underpriced for his role in this offense. So, not like a major argument against him. It's just a really tough matchup and hard for him to be a tournament winner. And that just leaves him off my pool. So I clarify that to say, like, I'm not arguing against Deontay Johnson. It's just not how I attack DFS.
Thoughts on a guy like Wan'Dale Robinson as a potential salary relief without Malik Neighbors? Wan'Dale's been, earning targets even with Neighbors in the lineup. He's going to be their wide receiver one this week. Could he pay off that price tag?
Yeah, I think it's 20 points that he's never topped, or like 20.1 points is maybe his best career game. We know how he's used, right? I mean, you look at his 11 catches, 71 yards, 7 catches, 61 yards, the 6 catches, 44 yards. These are Wan'Dale Robinson lines. So can he come close to 20? Absolutely. But like, can he bury me for not playing him? Can he win me a tournament? I don't think so. And I mean, he's sitting here with Christian Kirk, who's put up 25 plus multiple times in the last couple of years. Brian Robinson Jr., who I honestly think we could see priced at 7K before the end of the season and could have some 30-point games, within his range of outcomes this year. So I prefer to lean toward other guys. Like, it's not like Wan'Dale Robinson's 4,200. If he was 4,200, then I'd be like, shoot, like, let's get some Wan'Dale Robinson in there. But at 5,600, I just think there are better ceiling options once you get up into that price range.
I believe we've done the Zay Flowers conversation before, but worth mentioning him just because you like that game environment so much. But I'm pretty sure you didn't mention him as a potential stacking partner for you with Lamar.
Yeah, I mean, same thing, right? Like I don't think he's ever top 25. But with Lamar, then it makes sense, right? So that's another one. It's like, for me, it's Lamar plus Henry, Lamar plus Andrews, Lamar plus Likely, Lamar plus Zay. And I might only have Zay in large field, but I'm going to have Zay this week. It's just, on those Lamar rosters is where I'll have maybe some Burrow rosters as well.
Let's see here. I mean, we touched a little bit on the Colts. I did just see, again, kind of the news coming in. It's still very TBD on Anthony Richardson. Is this pretty binary for you? Like, if we get Flacco, some of those pass catchers are on the menu. If it's Richardson, more of a stay away with, say, like the Downs and Pittman. If
we get Flacco, Amari Cooper put up 54 points last year in a game with Flacco. Like,
yeah.
And Amari, we should also mention Amari because I mention him every week. If he didn't get that, questionable holding call that wiped off an 82-yard touchdown, that would now be 5 of 11 games with Deshaun Watson where he's put up 25 plus DraftKings points. He's 6,200. So that's almost half his, last 11 games with Deshaun Watson that he's put up 4X or more his salary. But he hasn't put up 54 points with Deshaun Watson. Like Joe Flacco just bombs away. He's going to throw the ball. I will probably love Downs and Pittman if Flacco's playing. Think about Pittman. Like last year, he was 6,800, 7K, and I almost never played him because it's like, no, you guys don't understand Pittman's role. Like he's the Keenan Allen, right? Like he has to see 14 targets to really pay off this price tag because he's not used in a big downfield role. He's the Michael Thomas at 8K. He's the Keenan Allen at 7,500. But now Anthony Richardson's been quarterback. His price has dropped down to 6K. I mean, it's just tremendous value if Flacco's out there. Same thing with Josh Downs. Really, really like these guys. If Flacco's playing, if Anthony Richardson's playing, it changes everything because, you're really just saying in terms of Anthony Richardson, if he throws for 250 yards, it's probably not through just consistently hitting the underneath guys. It's probably through like one big bomb downfield. And then that's probably not Downs or Pittman. And so, I mean, you watch these Anthony Richardson games, what I've been saying is like, he hits throws that no one in NFL history can hit, but he also misses throws that like a really good high school quarterback would hit on a consistent basis. It's crazy. And so, I just don't think like the expected value isn't there on these guys if Anthony Richardson's playing, but they skyrocket in terms of expected value if it's Flacco instead. So, and people always joke about competitive advantage, withholding injury information. It's a huge deal to have to prepare for Flacco and Anthony Richardson in the same week. It's a totally different offense that you would be preparing for. So I don't blame Steichen for withholding information. I bet he already knows what he's doing here, but we're going to have to wait maybe up until Sunday for it. And if we have to wait that long, I guess that just raises our edge, honestly, because, it'll be harder for people to move on to the right place.
Yeah, and I did just quickly pull up here the usage for Downs and Pittman these past couple weeks. I mean, 33% target share for Downs last week, 29% the week before, and then Pittman, very similar, 29% and 33%. So massive roles for these guys with Flacco slinging it. And it's always like a nice thing too, right, Jam? When like the content all week hasn't had time to digest like, oh, it's Flacco double stacks. It's like, we're going to get this news probably overnight into Sunday. I don't know. It'll probably be utilized a little less frequently than it should just because it'll break later in the week.
Absolutely. 100%.
All right. We got a nice crew here watching live today. Almost 600 of you. If you guys will hit that like button for us. If you are new here, subscribing. JM and I do this show every single Friday at 1 p.m. And then right after this at 2:30 p.m. Eastern, I do a very similar structured show, but with the Badge Bros, completely focused on the underdog slate. So we'll be talking about similar players, but completely different strategic angles, the way those draft games work. JM, I had 2 teams finish in the top 10 of the big battle royale last week. So going to try to keep the heater rolling on underdog in week 5.
That is wildly impressive. It's one of those things too, where, and this applies to DFS, the more you do it, the sharper you get at it. Cause I attacked the battle royale, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times a couple of years ago. And I could see the theory and strategy behind it. When you're drafting, it's also hard to go way off the board because you're like, everybody likes this guy, it's like there's no salary cap. You have to shift your mindset. So I love seeing like how these games become beatable the more time you spend with them. And you've spent so much time, playing the battle royale, talking about the battle royale, and you had the Bink a couple weeks ago and a couple top 10 finishes. I think that's really cool to see.
Yeah, and it would be really nice if I could have a nice finish on DraftKings. That continues to elude me. So, we will get there. How about you help us out at the tight end position this week? This is obviously a portion of the show we don't spend a ton of time on. We do have a couple kind of Q tag stuff. I haven't seen the George Kittle practice report this week or today. He didn't practice yesterday. McBride looks like he is going to go coming off the concussion. Evan Ingram's a game time decision. David Njoku is trending in the right direction. He's questionable, but looks like he's going to play. Any thoughts on the tight end position this week?
Evan Ingram's a game time decision that's come out.
Yeah.
We'll be building my rosters on Sunday morning this week. So I'll go deeper into this in the player grid, but I think this is interesting. Out of all the tight ends available this week, right? 20 plus tight ends, because every team has at least one guy they use and some have 2. So 20 plus tight ends through 4 weeks. The number of scores of 16 plus points that we've gotten from tight ends available this week, 8. And then those guys, it's been from 8 different players. Those guys in their other 21 games are only 2 and 19 just getting double-digit points. Wow. So one of the ways to look at that, I think the natural way is to be like, oh, well, like tight end hardly even matters. But the other way to look at it is if you're looking through the lens of trying to win a tournament, on average, that's been 2 scores a week of 16 plus points. And if you don't have that and you have 2 points at that position or 4 points at that position, like that's like when somebody gets 22 points at defense and you get 8 points at defense, like you are really chasing those rosters that got the 16-point score. The problem is it's been totally unpredictable where those scores are going to come from. And so it's kind of one of those things where I just kind of made a list of like the guys I think are capable, I don't think you can predict anything in this position, but just the guys who are capable of going for 25 plus, the guys who are capable of going for 18 plus. And then you just say like, man, I just got to take some swings on some of these guys and hope you get it right. So that's really, we could honestly like end the conversation there, right? I think Bowers has this really tough matchup against Denver, but he's the focal point of the offense. Trey McBride is like playing in the matchup against Fred Warner that you just don't play tight ends in that matchup. But he also went 10 catches for 100 yards in this matchup last year. George Kittle is, the guy likeliest to hit if he plays. Evan Ingram, I would say, is the other guy likeliest to hit if he plays. And then, I think people are going to overrate Colby Parkinson, but he's still in the mix because he can go for 18 plus points given his role. Same thing with Tucker Kraft. They're going to overrate him, but he can hit. I think one guy I do want to highlight, Mike Gesicki, played only 20 snaps last week, but it was on the heels of some really good games and being kind of involved from a game planning perspective in the offense. So I could see that being not a shift for the Bengals so much as maybe something game plan specific last week. So I think Gesicki's still in the mix. Eric All Jr. has 3 straight games with 4 catches and he's 2,700. So yeah, I mean, just a lot of different darts you can throw. And I think that's really what the position is just a lot of different darts you can throw, but you do have to think like who can actually go for a big score because somebody's going to, and it's going to help you to have that score.
You surprised me when we were talking about Lamar, even, mentioning Andrews. Obviously, he's been a pretty big disappointment this year, but you do think he's kind of viable. I assume that's maybe more large field than short field stuff to go to Andrews, just with how limited he's been.
I mean, I'll probably have an Andrews roster. I had Kelsey on like some of my main rosters last week. Sometimes these guys, I mean, Andrews is 29. He hasn't had like all the surgeries and the big hits that Gronk had. Gronk kind of started slowing down around this age, but I don't know. I just think that there's so much we don't know. We're not inside of the building. Similar to last week, Andy Reid, talking about that Travis Kelce hasn't lost a step and he's still going to have some big games this year. And I think it was Harbaugh who mentioned that this week, that Mark Andrews is, he's fine and he's going to have some big games this year. I mean, I just think that sometimes these things look really obvious in retrospect. Mark Andrews 4K, if he gets you 0, lots of other tight ends are going to get you 0. I mean, like if we could say at the start of the season that Colby Parkinson would be 300 less than Mark Andrews and everybody would be on Parkinson and not Mark Andrews, and now we have 4 games of like, and look what Parkinson's done. Not to say he can't go for 18 plus, right? But it's like, what if Mark Andrews gets 6 and Parkinson gets 7? It doesn't matter. But I just think that the lower ownership, I don't feel good about the Andrews play. It's just like, at this position, I'm willing to just say, man, who can hit for a huge score and people won't be on them? And it totally, I mean, a lot of Mark Andrews' biggest games of his career have been against this Lou Anarumo defense. And so would it shock me if he's a bigger part of the game plan this week? And if he has, a couple touchdowns, it wouldn't. And I think that's really very much worth pursuing on Lamar Jackson rosters, which is primarily how I'll play it.
Yeah, the guy I envision ending up as the most popular play on the slate is Tucker Kraft. Did just see that Luke Musgrave didn't practice again today with an ankle. So if we get, Kraft on his own in that game environment at this price, I would not be surprised to see him just kind of pull away from everyone from an ownership perspective. But yeah, I think that's probably wraps it up at tight end there for us, unless there's anything I'm missing, Jam.
No, we're good.
All right, we are good, which means it is time to build a lineup on DraftKings. Let's get ready to roll. All right, we got our Deposit Kingdom weekly league here, and it filled very fast this week. I generally reply to my guy over at DraftKings and ask him if we could make it bigger, and he sent it over to me before I got the chance to get the requested. So it was the same size, 900. It filled already. I am going to try to get this bigger, but the best way to make sure you guys lock in a spot is be in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. I've been posting it on Tuesdays. I tag everyone in the server and it's posted in the announcements. So if you want to guarantee a spot, enter the Deposit Kingdom Discord and then look for that link on Tuesday afternoons. But JM, we are going to start here with one of your favorite building blocks here. What is going to be the core for our lineup?
So we talked about this before the show. My name for this building block is Deebos, and it is the Deebo Samuel and then the Packers version of Deebo Samuel in Jaden Reed. And so these are 2 players who are completely uncorrelated. So often when we're doing these building blocks, it's about players who are correlated. But this is a pairing that I really like because Deebo Samuel is capable of going for 35 plus points. Jaden Reed is capable of going for 35 plus points. And when you have 2 players who do that on your roster, at these price tags, it just separates so much from the field. And so we've talked a lot about players who on this slate that I've highlighted and said, well, yeah, like they're solid plays. They can potentially get up to 4x their salary, potentially get up to 20 points, 24 points. Probably they get more like 17, 18. So if you have a lot of those, if a lot of guys on the slate end up with like popular guy who puts up 15, popular guy who puts up 17, popular guy who puts up 20, and these two both top 30, you're getting so much separation from the field. So I really like the idea in really great matchups for these guys. Both guys are very central to the game plans for the teams. And, we haven't touched on press conference stuff a lot this year, but I always try to pay attention to the little things that the coaches say. This last week, Matt LaFleur was asked about a play where Jayden Reed got up after the play and was like pumping up the crowd. And I don't know why the announcers thought that Matt LaFleur would have any interest in that, right? But LaFleur was like, oh, I didn't see that happen. But then he went off on a tangent about how great Jayden Reed is and how he sets the tone in the building every single day. And he's the guy who comes with a great attitude every day and everybody follows him. And like, he's the leader of the team. And when you hear coaches talk about players that way, those tend to be not just easy talented, but those tend to be players that like they want to lean on and run the game through them. And so we've been seeing that with Jayden Reed this year. He's got 15 plus DraftKings points, 9 of his last 10 regular season games with Jordan Love, a 30-pointer, 36-pointer already this year. And then obviously we know what Deebo is. So this pairing is just really interesting because it has potential to, both these guys hit and you really separate. You can throw Amari Cooper in here too. And, another guy who's 27 to 30 point potential, but in this same price range, the guys who could just really separate from the field.
I love it. And I assume as far as starting with this, that it does provide you a couple avenues where I'm guessing you'd be okay stacking these guys up with a Purdy or Love, but also because these guys do derive some of their production on the ground that you might be able to just play them as one-offs and say, what if they just, concentrate a lot of the production in those given games?
Yeah, exactly. Like these are great, two of the quarterbacks we really like. And so they're great stacking partners with those quarterbacks, but also, this is one of those situations where they can perform independent of their quarterback hitting or like we've talked about, like Purdy and Love are kind of the best shot at going for 24 to 26 points, but a very low shot at going for 30. So if you want to kind of target somebody who you think, hey, maybe this guy goes for 30, then you can go a different direction at quarterback. So on this roster, the next thing I want to do is throw on Jordan Whittington and then throw on the Broncos defense, because we can kind of start to get a feel for our salary here and what that means you want to do at other positions, because we know we'd like to pay up at running back if we can. Another block that I like this week is Whittington plus Kyren Williams, because they need less than 50 points just to go 4x their salary. And, we know that lead wide receiver in this Whittington role plus Kyren Williams can go for 60 plus. It happens a lot in this Rams offense. So that's one way we could go. I don't know. What do you want to do next? You want to go quarterback next? You want to go tight end next and kind of get another feel for our salary? What are you thinking here?
Well, yeah, it does seem like, when we were talking about the running back position, it sounds like we'll for sure want to get one of Kyren, Henry, or Mason. Do you like the Kyren Whittington pairing more than the Samuel Mason? Just, it costs a little bit more to get that Mason Samuel pairing.
Yeah, I like it a little bit more because the 49ers, if they go into kind of scoring preservation mode, there's fewer opportunities for just continue for like these two guys at their price tags to hit. Whereas if the Rams are just piling up a lot of volume on PPR scoring, you have more opportunity for Whittington and Kyren Williams to hit together, more opportunity for than like a Deebo and Jordan Mason. So this almost compels me to go. I don't mind playing them together, but like most of my Deebo rosters won't have Mason. So this kind of compels to look at what a Derrick Henry roster might look like. And then if we don't have the salary as we get deeper into this, then we can kind of pivot off that. So we can throw Derrick Henry in at running back right now. And then
with Kyren or in place of Kyren?
With Kyren, yeah. And then go with one of the because we can save money at tight end. We can actually go with one of these quarterbacks, Purdy or Love. And even though Love's a little bit more expensive, since we have Kyren and Whittington on this one, I'd like to go Love here and just see if we can make it work.
Yeah. So if we can get cheap at tight end here, then, what would be a good play? I'm just going to real quick, I'm going to see it. So if you have like a 3,700, that leaves you 3,600. So we're going to have to punt both tight end in this last flex spot. What do you think?
Yeah, so there's two ways to play this. One is this is the type of roster where I would put Tucker Kraft in place because Tucker Kraft's going to be popular. I think he's going to be more popular than he should be, but if he's hitting, it's going to be in an environment like this, right? You just pair him with the quarterback. He's on a very unique roster compared to what other Tucker Craft rosters will look like. But this is going to really tighten up our salary. We've got even Noah Brown is 100 too much, at least somebody with a
guess
role.
What? So I was just going to bring that up. Noah Brown just got ruled out, which I don't know if that gives some interest to Luke McCaffrey down here too.
Yeah. Or Alameda Zacchaeus, who had only 11 snaps last week, but put up a big game. Yeah. I mean, if we're going to punt, what's Noah Brown ruled out with? What a weird week.
Yeah. Let's see here. I saw that across my, my timeline here. I'll have to find it in a second, but
yeah, no worries.
Yeah.
So yeah, the other way to do it is to throw in Eric All Jr., who's only 2,700, and then that frees us up some extra salary. I almost feel like from a strategy standpoint, it's sharper to just ride with the chalk on Tucker Craft because we're doing enough different on this roster that I don't really care if Craft performs or not. This is kind of the spot where it's like, whatever, Craft can do whatever Craft does, and it doesn't kill me if he misses. And then that way, if he hits, I'm getting those points with a better built roster than the field has. Yeah. And then somebody, I mean, you can throw in McCaffrey or Alameda Zacchaeus. It's funny that there were reports out of camp like, Luke McCaffrey is going to be awesome, but then also a lot of reports out of camp of like, oh no, Luke McCaffrey doesn't have a role. Like he's not developing as fast as people thought. It was a very conflicting reports. And then he's looked good when he's been out there, but he hasn't been out there a ton. And so kind of weird to get a read on this spot, but I'll dive deeper into that now that Noah Brown's out. And one of these guys is, going to have to step up. So
I'm cracking up because it just crystallized to me. There's three things that happen when we build a lineup, JM, in the reactions. There is one where like you have a play that a lot of people haven't considered or they find gross and everyone's like, oh, vomit, Daniel Jones. No, I'll never play this. This is disgusting. Or there's version number 2, which is happening today where everyone's like, this is chalky. Oh, everybody's going to have this is going to chalky. And then there's the third. And that's if you hit the Goldilocks where you're like, oh, that's just spicy enough, but just good enough. Then people go, that's the lineup I already made earlier in the week. Those are the three things. There's no other reactions here. It's either the chalkiest, the worst, or someone
our vomit stacks have traditionally been like our most successful ones. But here's the thing. This is what's great about thinking about roster construction. I don't care what individual ownership is on pieces. What is the combinatorial ownership? Like people aren't going to have this roster. Like people aren't going to have Kyren and Derrick Henry again. Derrick Henry's not even projected to be all that popular this week.
He isn't. He's sub 11%. I'm seeing right now.
And people aren't going to have that much of Kyren and Jordan Whittington together. More so with Jordan Love at quarterback, right? Or people are going to have a ton of Tucker Craft, but like this is spot. So on this, we have kind of the two darts. It's Tucker Craft and Luke McCaffrey, but one of these darts is sort of wiped out from a dart throw standpoint because you're just saying, hey, look, I'm betting on this game environment. So that's the way to play a guy like Tucker Craft. And he's going to be popular, which in this instance is actually good because you're riding with the chalk as opposed to trying to differentiate from them, but you're riding with the chalk where the rest of your roster looks very different from other Tucker Craft rosters. And then you've got, Luke McCaffrey is kind of the one dart. And most rosters have to have one cheap dart where it's like, yeah, this guy could only get 4 points, but he could get 15 to 20. And you just hope it lands on the right side of that. So I just say from like right. I talked about it a couple of weeks ago. Most of our tournament wins are not going to come from picking players. It's going to come from understanding how to put together rosters. And that's kind of the main thing I try to focus on. So just from my perspective, from that perspective, this is a roster that I'm not at all worried about from a ownership standpoint because it's uniquely built enough that it separates. And that's what you need is not individual low ownership. It's combinatorial low ownership. And that's what this has.
Yeah. And people miss that so much, like you said, and a lot of the smart way of reviewing it is looking at product ownership versus cumulative too, and just understanding the build stuff because people are not going to want to punt off 3 spots in their lineup this week too. So there's lots of unique stuff. And again, people who are taking this lineup as the one and only lineup, while we are very flattered that you would want to assign such gravitas to this lineup, this is meant to be an exercise to think about the blocks. And as we were even talking about, there's so many different ways you could spin this off. This could have been a Purdy team. This could have been a team where you end up going to Mason. There's all kinds of different avenues here, but I like the way this fit together. And it's almost a similar exercise to JM that you do with the bottom up build, right? Where you kind of find out where are the pieces I'm actually comfortable with down below? And I mean, I just threw the McCaffrey thing at you on the spot because I saw the Noah Brown news, but you're going to probably have more conviction on what sub 4K guys you actually like. And then you'll say to yourself, can I do a build like this because I feel comfortable with that sub 4K guy? And if the answer is no, then maybe I don't feel comfortable getting on a build like this.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more you mess around with things, the more you're going to start seeing new things that might open up for you. And, you know, the closer you're going to get to kind of that optimal build for your style of play. But yeah, I mean, I like this. And this is what I'm going to have a lot of rosters that kind of play around with angles like this week.
Yes. Awesome stuff. Like I said, guys, don't forget, you can get up to 30% off of 1 week season subs this week with promo code Pete30. Pete30 will get you 30% off. That's Inner Circle and all of the various memberships, including if you guys just want to check out a weekly pass. Again, JM, you will be filling out the rest of the content. I think I mentioned last week too, you got the podcast feed, and when will that Angles pod go up?
Yes, I'll be recording that next. And so it'll go up. It goes up on the Inner Circle podcast feed first. And then like a couple hours later goes up on the public podcast feed. And just one other note on that, the promo code Pete still works for 20% off of a weekly pass. So if you guys want to use that,
for
hop in for a week, you can still do that. Yeah, Angles pod goes up. Rich Rebar, Lord Reeves from Sharp Football Analysis, and Hilo's Searching for Ceiling podcast should already be up on the 1 week season podcast feed. So yeah, lots of good stuff going up today, tomorrow. Lots of good content to dive into and kind of keep getting different angles on the slate.
Awesome stuff. Make sure you guys go and check that out. Like I said, I'm going to be hopping on with the Badge Bros here in 15 minutes for Off and On the Clock. And then I'll also have, I've been doing a weekly Battle Royale strategy video on the Deposit Kingdom channel. That is not a live stream. That is a pre-recorded video with all the editing bells and whistles. That's where I, rubber stamp Jaden Reed as one of my favorite scroll down gems last week on Underdog. So you guys can go see what I'm cooking up there later this afternoon. Thank you to JM. Good luck this week. And we'll see you guys at the top of the leaderboards. Peace.